Hi, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Diane Blazek, the Executive Director of All America Selections, and I'm here to explain what it means when you see that logo that has the big letters AAS in it. I'll start by explaining what National Garden Bureau is. NGB is a nonprofit organization that is now the umbrella organization over All America Selections. We were founded in 1920 by Mr. James Burdett, who also happened to write the original Victory Garden Manual back in 1945. Then in 1932, Mr. Ray Hastings was a member of the Southern Seedsmen Association, and he founded All America Selections. What he was wanting to do is figure out if all these claims that the breeders were making about some of their new varieties were really true. So a neutral nonprofit organization started by trialing flowers and vegetables by volunteer judges all over North America. Now I'm going to interject a little trivia. So, how many trial types did AAS start with in 1932? The answer is two. We started with an edible or vegetable trial as well as an ornamental or annual trial. And in a few minutes, I can explain how many trial types we have today. A really easy way to explain and understand what All America Selections does is to compare them to Underwriter Laboratories or the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval. In both of those instances, those companies are testing products in a typical consumer setting, and if they perform well, then they get to have that stamp of approval on. And All America Selections is the same way, except we do it for plants instead of mixers and blow dryers, etc. One of the primary things that All America Selections does is the publicity and public relations for our winners. So I said we were founded in 1932. The first trials were in 1933. So the first set of annuals that we had that we announced were the 1934 annuals. And you can see that then the executive director, Mr. Hastings, wrote up an article for the Better Homes and Gardens, and that was in the February issue of 1934. I always look at that and think that's pretty cool that we can still have evidence of some of the first winners and how they were publicized. Now, here's another trivia question. How many winners were introduced that first year after incorporation? And the answer is that there were 32 flower winners, including 6 gold medal ones, and 12 vegetable winners, including 3 gold medals. That's a total of 44 winners that year. These days, it's typically more like 15 to 25 winners each year. So obviously, in its first year, it was a thriving success. Speaking of those 1933-34 winners, it's always super cool when we realize that some of those older winners are still available. For example, this Imperator carrot is still on the market, and you can see by some of our NGB members there, Fairy Morse, True Leaf, and Wilhite Seeds are still carrying one of these 1933 winners. So that's a little bit about our history, but current day, All America Selections continues as the oldest, most established plant testing organization in North America. Here's a funny little tidbit. You notice I have international crossed out. That's because I was giving a presentation one time, this is quite a few years ago, unaware that somebody from Royal Horticulture Society was in the audience. As I finished, they kind of waved their hand and said, Diane, I kind of think Royal Horticulture Society's been around longer than All America Selections. So these days, I just cross out the word international in my presentation. Despite being around for 90 some years, it's amazing that a lot of the details about how our trials are conducted are still done exactly the same. This picture is what I'm calling a classic trial. You have an entry and 2 comparisons. They're grown in ground, they're grown in just plain old boring rows because that's the easiest way for the judges to look at the entry, compare it to the other variety that's on the market that's very similar, and that way they can judge those traits to figure out if this entry is really worthy of that AAS award designation. I talked earlier about how we started with just 2 trials, but this is what our trials look like today. We did a lot of changes in 2021, But whereas we started with just 2 trials, now we have 7 different trials. We still do edibles from seed in ground, but we added the container trial. We still do ornamentals from seed in ground, but we added the container trial. And then, about 10 years ago, we added ornamentals that are propagated from non-seed methods, usually vegetatively or tissue culture propagation. We trial those in ground and in containers. And then we also added a perennial trial, and those are trialed in ground over 3 winters to test for survivability. So we went from 2 trials to 7 trials over the past 90 years. More trivia. Now it's talking about the perennial trial. So we started this perennial trial in 2015, and because we have to grow them over 3 winters, the first winners were not announced until 2019. So, in the grand scheme of things, we have not been trialing perennials nearly as long as we've been trying annuals. The other new trial we introduced is the container trials, and that is for the ornamentals from seed, the ornamentals that are vegetatively propagated, as well as for edibles. You can go to any local garden center, big box store, anybody's front yard, backyard, you're going to see the proliferance of how many people are now planting in containers. It's a lot easier, it's smaller. For today's smaller yards, it works. So this is something that we introduced, and we trial a lot of our entries in both in-ground and containers, and then we designate that on our website so you know if they will perform well in a container in your garden. Here's another new trial that we've added. It's called a series trial, and I'll explain a little bit here. So if you look there on the right, the Calliope medium dark red green leaf is an AAS winner, and it won several years ago. And then you can see that they have brought out other colors in this same Calliope series. And with AAS, the rule for entries is that they have to perform better than the comparisons. And what we saw happening is people were wanting to compare a new color to a color that's already in the series that has already won an AAS award. And if you just look at that, common sense says, well, it's not going to be better. It's going to perform the same as this one that won several years ago. So now we've opened it up to additional colors in a series. And so the breeders can enter a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth color, whatever, and possibly have an entire series that would become AAS winners. So you're probably wondering, where do we do this trialing? So this map shows you that we have trialing locations all over North America. So we cover the United States and Canada in all the different states and provinces. Of course, it changes, it evolves year to year, but for the most part, we have at least 80 to 85 different trial locations with about 90 judges in those locations. That ensures that if something grows well in New York, it's going to grow just as well out in Portland. So what kind of information do we ask from our judges, and how do we determine if it's a winner? So we ask the judges for their input in 3 key areas. Number one is we ask them to give it a score, and our scale then is very much equal to, hey, it's average, or it's above average, or it's superior, or maybe it's less. And then we also ask the questions, well, should it be an AAS winner, and does it deserve a gold medal? So we take all 3 of those elements, combine them, do the mathematical equation, evaluate them, and that's how we determine which of the entries will become an AAS winner. And who exactly are our judges? Well, they are professional horticulturists. They work for a very wide range of companies. It may be a university public garden, it may be a seed buyer for a seed company, it might be somebody in charge of trials at an organization, like at a grower or a breeder, or again at a public garden. So our judges are definitely vetted for their trialing experience, and then every year we evaluate their scores too, just to make sure that they're on track and not too jaded or too easily wowed by something new. I briefly mentioned comparisons earlier, but if you want to know what some of our winners were trialed against, you just go to this page on our website. It would be the AAS Winner page, and you drop down to winner details, and there it's going to say closest market comparisons. That way you can take a look and you can be like, oh, this has been my favorite Gara for years and years. Why should I try the new one? Well, it's been trialed by all these judges across North America. So if they say it's better, you can pretty much ensure that it's going to do better in your garden than that favorite that maybe you've been planting for 20 or 30 years. One of the fun questions I usually get is about the judges. Do they have to taste test the edible and vegetable entries? And absolutely, they must. Taste and texture is something that every single edible entry is judged on. So not only are the judges trying it, but they also get public opinion sometime. This is one of our judges that the year we had a lot of tomato entries, they chose to have a tomato taste testing. And so they divvied them up, did not name the varieties, and then they got feedback from their garden visitors on which tomatoes they thought were the best tasting ones. After that taste test, or after a summer of growing and observing, then what happens? Well, this screen just shows the scores that we ask our judges to submit and some of those questions that I mentioned earlier. They put that into this Mercado app, and that's how we determine whether or not it's an AAS winner. Another trivia question: how many total entries do we get every year? And it varies, it fluctuates, but I would say 50 to 55 is about average for each year. And then of those, maybe 50% of those actually become AAS winners. Once we get the scores in, we communicate with the breeders. We find out if they are ready to introduce that variety to the market. And if so, we take that information to our board of directors and they approve it. So we get to have 3 announcement times every year. We announce in January, July, and November. So if you want to keep an eye on our website, those 3 times a year, that's when you'll get some of the first information about what the newest AAS winners are. Once those winners are approved, that's when the real fun begins. That's when we get to, shout it from the rooftops and begin all of our marketing and promotions. And how do we do that? Well, we use social media quite a bit. And of course, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we love Pinterest, and we also do a lot of videos on YouTube. So subscribe to us there and you'll be able to see videos that we do or our breeders do about the new AAS winners. And of course, we still utilize traditional print as well as digital media to work with those journalists to get the words out about the new AAS winners. And naturally, we have a website that has a lot of information. This is our homepage here. And then I have a few arrows pointed to some of the key things that you might be interested in. The AAS Winner Search is a great resource. Display gardens, I'll talk about in a little bit. We have a blog where we write about different AAS winners and different ways to use them. And then I've got an arrow pointing to Pinterest, since I was so adamant that we really, really like Pinterest because it's a great way to provide information to any gardener looking for new varieties. Speaking of information about AAS winners, this is what the page looks like when you get to each individual variety. One of the number one questions I get is, where can I get these AAS winners? So every AAS winner does have a where to buy drop down menu so that you can look there, and if they're available from an online retailer, that's where you would be able to buy them. If you don't see them here, very likely you can go to your local brick and mortar garden center and find the varieties there. In the very beginning of this, I talked about that AAS logo, so just look for that on the tags or as a display, and you'll find these varieties. Along with a lot more information is on this page about the AAS winners, including like how to grow and maintain them. Now let's talk about our valued display gardens. In fact, you might be listening to this because of one of our display gardens. So we have about 200 display gardens throughout the US and Canada. You can see the map here. And what those gardens do is they are provided the seeds and plants of AAS winners. They put them out in their gardens and label them appropriately so that anyone interested in viewing the AAS winners and seeing how they perform in their own local area can go to one of the display gardens. There's signage like this that some of the display gardens put up. All of them are marking the AAS winners with variety markers, either these, which we provide, or ones very similar that they make on their own. We do put the QR codes on them now so that you can go right to the website, right to that page of the website that I showed you, and get any additional information that you need. Our last trivia question: how many AAS winners have been introduced since 1932? And the answer is a whopping 902 varieties have been named as AAS winners. So it looks like we're creeping up on 1,000 in the next few years, which is pretty exciting. Well, that's my brief introduction about what it takes to become an AAS winner and how these entries are trialed. And now I'm going to turn it over to your host, and they can tell you about some of the specific varieties that are AAS winners.